Hi, I'm Trevor Crow with Trevor and Jill Talk. Today, Jill and I are really excited to have James Carlin join us. Jim has been a practicing attorney in both New York and Connecticut for over 20 years. He's also the founder and chair of the Fairfield County Bar Association Wellness Committee, which is dedicated to educating its members and the public about wellness issues impacting the legal profession. Really important because I know how stressed out you guys are. He's also an advocate for ending the stigma of mental illness in the workplace. Again, very important, especially with my job, because of course you guys know I'm a therapist. And for 5 years, Jim served as an officer in the U.S. Army Reserves, where he earned 3 Army Commendation Medals for meritorious service before being honorably discharged in 2019. He's also a father of 2 and a longtime resident of Weston, Connecticut, and an author of a very important book I believe all of us really need to read immediately, because I think this is one of the top issues of today, very relevant. Welcome to James Carlin. Tell us about your book.
Well, thank you. And first of all, thank you, Jill and Trevor, for inviting me. This is a great pleasure for me to be here, so thank you very much. The book is kind of my effort, my attempt to go back in time and talk to myself as the person I was 20 years ago, and have a conversation with that person, and try and synthesize all of the lessons learned over the last several years, all the lessons learned from all of the therapy that I've been through, the lessons learned during my hospitalization, the lessons learned during a rather contentious divorce, all of those things, and to try and put it into language that, I mean, if I can understand it, anybody can understand it. And I really wanted it to try to be relatable to everybody who read the book, not just professionals, because certainly I'm not a professional therapist whatsoever. I really wanted to make it relatable to everybody. So that's what the book is about. And I use the vehicle of a conversation with another man, but another human, could be any gender, to be honest with you, to use, and I use that as a vehicle to tell my story.
It's amazing because your book is, it's so relatable. When I was reading it, I felt like this is a guy I know, or I know guys like him, or maybe I don't even know how much I know guys like him, because you talk about a lot of the issues that men face and that resulted in you having depression and other issues that you were treated for. And you very bravely have come out, very frankly, with your story to help others and make other people realize how important this is, and to remove the stigma of mental illness that in the workplace, out in the world. And what moved me, I was saying this to Trevor before, I've seen Meghan Markle, Michelle Obama, then Melissa from the toy company, she was on CBS talk about it, but I do not see nearly as often men bravely come out to say this. And I think one of the facts in your book was that like 1/3 of men almost suffer from depression sometime in their lifetime. I'm sure you're quite familiar with that, Trevor. So can you talk about that, how you felt about sharing this, and why men need to hear about this more?
Yeah. The easiest way to answer that question is to just mention something that happened to me just the other day. I had somebody that I know, without identifying who they are, had read the book and reached out to me and said, "I got to talk to you." And he sent me an email and he said, "Let's go meet and have lunch together." So we did. And the first thing he said to me when we sat down was, "I honestly thought that you were talking to me from page 1." I not everything was on par, because of course our lives are all different. We have different experiences and we're all in different circumstances. But that's the first thing he said to me. And the second thing he said to me, which I think goes to your question, is I didn't really think there was anybody I could talk to about this, because I've always viewed it as my role as a husband, as a father, to solve problems and to find the solution to problems that arise. and
And not for others to help find a solution to your.
not for others to help me find solutions to my problems. That's my job. And he also said that if I'm going through something that's difficult and hard, and he's telling me about abuse that he suffered as a child and sort of thing. I view that as my job as a man. I have to do that. And I it was a difficult conversation. It's not the only conversation like this that I've had. And I always make it a point not to tell somebody what I think they should do, because that's not my role as even a friend. I wouldn't do that. I did make it very clear to him, though, and I gave my opinion on this. Your job and your expectation of yourself should not be to take abuse. That is not your job. That is not acceptable under any circumstances, and I don't care who is perpetrating the abuse. It's not acceptable.
So I'm going to just show up a quick photo of Jim's book called Conversations with a Desperate Man. And again, as Jill pointed out, it takes a lot of courage, Jim, to come out and tell your story so clearly. And it wasn't simply just workplace, because you were experiencing bullying in the workplace. Your relationship with your spouse at the time was contentious, as you say. But there's plenty of us out here. There's lots of therapists. I just think the access or the internal conversation for many men is not like, how do I go find help? Because I'm supposed to be strong and capable, and I'm the one solving all the problems. And then one thing piles on another, and then you start to crumble. And most men really don't know what to do or where to go. So what was it what made you make that decision to reach out and get help?
I wish I could say that it was the years and years of family members telling me that I was starting to break down and the cracks were appearing in the dam. I wish I could say that. I wish I could say it was my work colleagues who would come up to me and say, hey, you just don't seem like the same person anymore. That the light is dimming, and that spark that you had in you was gone. I wish I could say it was my reserve commander who came up to me and said, there's something going on with you and we need to talk about it. And that's a conversation you never want to have, but I had it. I wish I could say it was all of those things, but honestly, for me, and I almost think I'm lucky in this respect, for me, my body just began to break down. So it certainly was psychological, it certainly was emotional, but and this kind of goes into the stigma and the misconceptions people have, I think, about mental illness. It's very physical. It's not all in your head. It's not something that you're just making up. It's something that you're going to bed with at night, likely not sleeping, and it's something that you're waking up with every single morning. And so for me, over time, it was increased blood pressure, where I never had a blood pressure problem before. It was chronic fatigue. It was the inability to eat, the inability to sleep. And over time, it gradually graduated to panic attacks. So just imagine, you're trying to walk in your house at night and your heart rate's going up and you're sweating and you're dizzy. That happened to me multiple times, sometimes during the course of a day. So for me, I think when that started happening and my medical doctor actually started taking notice of it, it just became impossible to ignore and push down. Your body, if you're lucky, your body's gonna set you straight, even if your mind is telling you that you can think your way out of it or something like that.
How often have we talked about this? And Trevor, you've written about this whole mind-body, connection, and that how often it comes out that way. So at that point, you decided, I'm going to get treatment. And not only did you get treatment, and I don't want to jump ahead, but not only did you get treatment and write this incredible book, you're now taking all these steps to help others. So maybe you give a little background on sort of that trajectory.
Yeah. So, I mean, the trajectory was that, it was a day in the sort of early summer of 2018 when I had gone to my doctor for another visit. And I was having a panic attack, but this time I was right in the office. So this time I was sitting in the treatment room, and he was taking my blood pressure, and it was just absolutely through the roof. So I remember he turned the light off in the examining room, and he kind of just grabbed my hand, held my hand, which I know it sounds a little strange, but and he had me close my eyes and breathe deeply for a minute with the lights off, and then I opened my eyes again, and they retook my blood pressure, and it wasn't perfect, but it was far better than it was. So at that point, he said to me, you have to get some help. I'm going to send you home with some Xanax, but Xanax is a Band-Aid. It's not. You got to figure out what's going on with you, because until you do, um, you know, you're not going to solve it, and you have to get help. And that, I knew that I was in a bad state. I really did, and I was holding things together as best I could, but I knew that I wasn't going to be capable of that anymore, and I had to take some drastic measures. And my mom, not so much my mom and dad, I kept them out of it, which they were upset about, but they've since read the book. But my siblings really jumped in and said, hey, you're going to get the help. Let's figure out how to do it. And I had a good friend of mine at work who was on very close friends with one of the members of the board of directors of the hospital where I was ultimately admitted. And I was able to get a room within 2 to 3 days, which is not a common occurrence. And I'm forever grateful for him for stepping up and doing that for me.
So, what's really interesting is when you say, somebody, your doctor held your hand, turned the lights out. There's actually very good research that shows when somebody holds our hand, even a stranger, we calm way down. We're literally, the oxytocin and, hormonal surge happens when we are touched. So it makes a lot of sense. And when we're in a panic place, that is the one place we calm down. And our relationships in the end, and and Jill knows I talk about this all the time, our relationships are the things that save us. So here you are, this guy with a serious career, wife, 2 kids in the reserves, all these stresses, and really so few places to go for connection. Your siblings are showing up, and whatever's going on with your relationship at home, if your spouse is not supportive. So all these things come together and coalesce like the perfect storm, right? And thankfully you get into this, I'm guessing, because of the way it sounds, like a local mental hospital that I'm aware of. It's very, very excellent. I send people there too. And I'm really glad you got the help. And it's so interesting, because I've heard about it, or the experiences through my clients, and what you do when you relate through your book is it's both very mundane and then very chaotic, because you're dealing with people who are also dealing with all this stuff. So tell us about that experience.
Yeah, and I think your characterization is absolutely on point. It is both mundane and chaotic. It's both an exercise in kind of the mundane and the repetition and the routine, as much as it is every minute of the day. It seems like there's something new. There's a new patient coming in. There's somebody leaving. There's somebody getting in a fight with their doctor. There's somebody who's getting angry with a family member on the payphone in the hallway. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff going on around you, and it's a challenge. I mean, in so much as that environment is helpful, because it allows you to have time to yourself. I mean, you go in there and your phone is gone. You have no ability to communicate with the outside world except for the designated patient phone. You really have nothing to do other than go to your therapy sessions, talk with your other patients while maintaining appropriate boundaries and that sort of thing. And just thinking about your life and talking about things with your psychiatric nurses and your social workers. That's what goes on in there. So
was there any moment that brought you this sort of enlightenment or this aha moment where something seemed really clear to you while you were going through that experience?
I think that it's hard to pick any one moment, but if I had to choose, I was there the whole week, and when you read the book, you'll see that my feelings about the hospital my feelings about the patients that I was with really did evolve over the course of that week. I mean, it started out where I just didn't feel like I needed to be there, and why was I there, and what was I doing? You know, you sort of forget. Time has a way of creating, you know, distance between things, and so I wasn't thinking about the panic attacks and the high blood pressure and the cognitive dysfunction and the emotional dysregulation that I had when I was feeling like, why am I here? You know, because that all happened before I got in there. But over the course of the week, as I went through my therapy, my group therapy sessions, talking to my social workers, talking to my psychiatrist, the picture started to get a little clearer. And if I had to pick one kind of seminal event, it was at the end of that week, before the weekend, where we had a guest speaker who came in, who was a former patient in the hospital, very well-known person, I think, in his industry, so I don't have to say more than that. But he said something that really resonated with me. He was talking a lot about addiction because that was his demon. But at the end of that conversation, since I don't suffer from addiction, he said something that resonated with everybody, which was, he said, some of you are not addicts, and so a lot of what I said you may want to tune out, but you're here for a number of different reasons. But he said, I can tell you that if you're around people who are keeping you, you know, stuck, if you're in a negative pattern of behavior, if you're around people who are toxic, even if they're friends, even if they're people you've known for years, but they're encouraging bad behavior in you, or they're keeping you in a negative place, and they're not allowing you to kind of grow and develop, you have to get rid of those people. And it's not an easy thing to do. It's a hard thing to do, because a lot of those people you may actually genuinely like, but if they're no good for you, then you have a responsibility to yourself to, you know, to just end those relationships. And you know, that if I had to pick one thing out of that entire week, and it's not to diminish everything else that went on, because everything else that went on was rather significant, but that really does stand out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, did you end up following through with that advice? Did you find people that you had to kind of
Yeah,
curate out of your life, maybe?
yeah. I mean, I can tell you that not long after I got out of the hospital, and I should say that I got out of my residential stay at the hospital, and then immediately I went into an intensive outpatient program that went on for 9 weeks. So that was several hours a day, 3 days a week at a different hospital. And that really helped to buttress the experience, because what I said before about time kind of passing by, and you know, you sort of forget about things and they become less important, and you get distracted. The outpatient program really helped to reinforce a lot of the lessons that I had learned in the hospital, and it kind of kept me straight. And they were very upfront. The hospital was about stabilization. It was about getting me back to a certain level of functioning. The outpatient program was more like, well, what do we do now? You know, how do we keep you from sliding back? What do you have to learn? How do you have to process things differently? And how do you have to think differently about the decisions you need to make in your life? And that's what the outpatient program was. So yes, I changed jobs after getting out of the hospital, and you know, left a previous environment that just wasn't good for me. And ultimately, yeah, I moved out of my house and lived alone for the first time in, you know, 20 years. So I did follow through with it. It wasn't easy. I mean, it's a short answer to your question, but it wasn't easy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when you took these steps and you changed positions, and you have, I don't know when you started the Fairfield County, the wellness chapter. Did that coincide with you kind of, I don't know if the right word, promoting how important it is to remove the stigma of mental health in the workplace? And how are you doing that? Because, you know, really that is so crucial and so important. And also, how's the pandemic affecting that? Because we all know that the pandemic has,
Sure.
you know, put these things through the roof, and so many new ways.
It's funny that the Bar Association initiative came about pre-pandemic, and it was just in January. And I can't really, pardon me, January of 2020. So kind of before the
Right.
dystopian
Just before.
nightmare. Yeah. Um, but I just, and I can't explain exactly what came to mind. I woke up one day and I said, we really should do something about this, because here I am, I'm dealing with this. I'm still going to therapy, and I've been going to therapy for 6 years. I mean, it wasn't just my hospitalization that started that process. It's been a long time process for me, but I just thought the Bar Association or something like it needs to be doing something to call attention to this. And so I didn't, it didn't start with forming the committee. It actually started with a presentation that I created to talk to the members of the Bar Association about. And the Bar Association is an educational committee amongst other aspects. And so they put on programs for lawyers, and you get professional credit for attending those programs. So I decided to do a program on mental health and to talk about the crisis of mental health in our profession. And that's what I did. And that presentation highlighted, as an example, recent suicides in our profession. And, I dug pretty deep into a variety of recent suicide cases, some high level, highly publicized cases, at least in the legal community, that were highly publicized. And I tried to really understand, what was it about what we're doing and how we're doing it as a profession that might be contributing to these problems. And that was the presentation. And it happened to be attended by the incoming chair or president of the Bar Association and the outgoing president. They kind of were crossing. And they saw the presentation. They came up to me afterwards and said, "Hey, we have been trying to establish a wellness committee for a long time. We think you're the guy to do it. Would you consider putting together the committee?" And I said, what do you say to that? I mean, I said, sure, I guess I'll still do it. So it wasn't really my idea, to be honest with you. It was the current president of our Bar Association was the one who approached me, and his predecessor. So that's how it came about. And,
Do you, do you really think institutionally, places like law firms and the Bar Association are truly open to and ready to make the change necessary to support the mental wellness, let's call it wellness, of their people? Is that actually happening, or is this just a lot
wow. That's an excellent question. It actually gets into the conversation about stigma and like why do we even have this problem to begin with? And I think there's a lot of reasons why. One reason is that mental illness is it's almost like a black hole, black hole in space. You can't see it, but you can see its effects. And people, for that reason, because you can't measure it on a blood test, there's no depression blood test that comes back and then they give you the medicine and it takes care of the problem. It's, as I alluded to earlier, a lot of people think it's all in your head. And as advanced as we are, as a society, we just landed a 3D camera on Mars, and we're going to bring back Martian rock from Mars. It's crazy. We're pretty advanced, but I don't know that attitude has changed all that much. I think the other problem that we have is we're talking about issues that actually have a direct impact on performance. So if you think about what we have done as a profession, and it's not just limited to the legal profession, but perhaps most especially it's been done in our profession, where we have gone after racial discrimination in the workplace. We have gone through years now of mandatory sexual harassment training in the workplace to try to make the work environment better, just to use that example, for women. And I guess if you watch the news, we're not doing as good a job as we should, because clearly our behavior is not where it needs to be. But so we've acknowledged that problem. And I don't think any but the most unenlightened would say that, there is a correlation between work performance and your ability to do the job and your race. there's a correlation between your gender and your ability to do this job. I mean, I don't think any serious people really believe that anymore. I mean, that's really passé, um, and rightfully so. It's rightfully in the dustbin of history. But I think with mental illness, it's a different animal because, in fact, if you're suffering from depression and if you're suffering from anxiety or you have an addiction issue or something of that nature, it does affect your performance quite a bit.
Mhm.
You know, and we're about a lot of things as a profession, but one thing we're certainly about is the bottom line, right? We're definitely about being as profitable as a law firm, to use the example, as we can be. And so if you have people in there who are emotionally compromised or psychologically compromised, it's an issue. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean it's okay. You know, that doesn't mean it's okay to marginalize people in your workforce who may be suffering from, what are really medical issues in a lot of cases.
But
Whereas
I
if you
think,
are suffering from a cancer diagnosis
right,
or some other,
right.
very sad, unfortunate physical, there's much more empathy. So how do we, what you're doing, that's why it's so important, because this deserves the same.
But and I want to mention one thing, Trevor, because I want to make sure I'm responsive to your question too, which is, are they ready to do something about it? That's actually one of the hardest things to get a handle on is whether they're ready or whether they're going to be ready in the near future. And that's because I think mental illness, for the most part, in the workplace is viewed as an outside problem.
Right.
So if people have anxiety and depression, then they're bringing that with them into the workplace. They have a problem at home, they have a sick child, they lost a loved one, something like that, and that's weighing down on them. And so if you're the manager, the supervisor, or the chairperson of the organization, the law firm, whatever it is, and you're looking at this, you're saying, well, look, people have issues and they just have to deal with them. The real,
Yeah, but there could
the,
be a really negative, toxic culture of bullying.
of course.
And
And I mentioned earlier that I did that presentation for the Bar Association where I highlighted recent suicides. One of those suicides was a guy named Gabe McConnell who killed himself in his law firm's parking garage. Okay, and his spouse, his widow, wrote an article about how that culture, how that environment literally killed her husband.
mm,
Now you can look at her article and you can pick it apart and you can say, yeah, but we're not like that, or you can do all that stuff, and we can have the meeting in the conference room. We can pick a different color ribbon to wear on our suits to show our support. We can do all those things, and that's fine. But if you really want to deal with this, it's not going to be easy. It's going to require a real paradigm shift. It really is. There's no simple way to say it. It's going to be a significant change that has to happen.
Are there
well,
some industries that are handling it better? You might know this already, Trevor. Are there some industries that have made those strides or have those policies in place? And because I'm thinking you're in these very, between the how about the military? What happens there? I mean, that is a place that
a very difficult culture. There are a few, and the military does reach out to us. That I do have colleagues that go down and do free therapy for military families. I've been hired by wellness EAPs, and that's been really terrific. I've got a few of them. So yeah, there are companies that are committed to saying, okay, we're going to pay for your therapy. We know you need something, you're struggling, let's work it out. But that the paradigm for you, for even that wellness or EAP is employee assistance program, is like, the problem's out there. Have your therapist talk about it out there. It's not coming from here where maybe somebody's not supporting you or somebody's literally beating you up emotionally, abusively, whatever in the workforce. So I think there's many angles to attack this from. And I mean, Jim, I think that this is the beginning of a lot of conversations, and I'm really glad that you're bringing this up. So I'm going to shift this before we we end this because I love the focus on the workplace, but I think more on a granular, on the ground level, which I do think men are really suffering, especially men in middle age and upper and middle income bracket who have had high educations of super expensive lifestyles, don't know where to go for help, and get to these places. We call it deaths of despair. They become addicted. They're, dying by suicide at a much greater rate, certainly since the early 2000s. So I do think there's been a crisis, if you will, for men, say, I would say 40 to into 60s. Could you speak to that? And what would you say to a guy who's struggling with all those burdens, trying to keep it together in, like, Fairfield County, Connecticut? I mean, it's a tough place.
Yeah, it is a tough place, and just one quick anecdote before I answer your question. I one of the things I think that maybe Jill alluded to was, why did I write this book? Why did I get this book out there? It's because I have seen this up close. I've seen the deterioration up close. I can tell you that this past summer, I had someone I've known for a number of years come up to me and say, "Hey, my family member is suffering. Can I talk to you about your hospitalization?" Because he happened to know about my hospitalization, and we talked about it for about an hour. And at the end of that conversation, I said to him, "If your family member, who let's just say would meet the demographic, Trevor, that you're talking about, if your family member has questions, if they want to talk, if they want to know more about my experience and my process, then don't hesitate. I don't care if it's 3 o'clock in the morning and he needs to reach out to me. Just have him do it. Don't wait." 4 days after that conversation, if it was even that long, unfortunately, he took his own life. And so it's a difficult thing, and I will tell you, I was actually on the fence a little bit about putting this book out there and publishing it, because there's a lot of personal stuff. It's not it's not an easy thing for you to tell your family members, let alone like total strangers who don't even know you, but maybe they're reading the book. But after that happened, I said, this is not something that we can just ignore. This is a real problem. And what was his problem? His problem was, it was work. But what's driving that? I don't know. I'm speculating now, but he probably had a lot of obligations at home, probably had a lot of obligations to continue to subject himself to that environment, which wasn't good for him because he had a lot of obligations, to various people in his life. So the first thing that I would say is you have to understand that you're not alone in this. There's just so many people out there who are everybody's a duck on the water, and they're floating along, and you think they've got it all together, but underneath they're kicking like crazy. That's just the way it is. Yeah. So the first thing to understand is you're not alone.
Great analogy.
Yeah. So you're not alone. And then the second thing is, hopefully, if you're a guy, there's two. This is it's just my opinion, but there's two major stressors in your life, or things that can potentially be stressors. There's your job and there's your personal relationship, with your husband, your wife, whoever it is, whatever your dynamic is. And if one of those two things is off, the other can kind of compensate for it. So if the job is going sideways and you're under a lot of pressure, but you've got somebody who is just a rock, okay, and he or she is behind you 10,000%, well, you can get through almost about anything. You really can. The reverse is not necessarily also true, because if your job's going great and your home life is terrible, I don't care how good your job is, it's probably not going to compensate. But you get my meaning. Yeah. Hopefully you have somebody in your life who you're close to, if you're married or you have a significant other, who can be that support for you, and lean on them. You have to share what it is that you're going through. you have to, like we talk about the power of being vulnerable. Once you let it out and people understand what's happening to you, then I mean, it is such a relief to be able to do that. And you hopefully don't have to get to the point that I did, where I just kept everything inside until, the pipe burst. So I would say recognize you're not alone, and then start sharing what you're going through with the people around you. And then of course, get professional help. And I mean, you know, it's fine to have the motivational tapes and the whole thing. That's great, but get a somebody who is clinically trained to work with you, that can help you, whether it's cognitive behavioral therapy or some other modality, who can help you understand and process what it is that you're going through. And then, of course, if you need medical intervention, that's obviously something that can be pursued as well. But that's it. I mean, that you have to do that stuff. You have to do it.
I'd like to say that, I would think it would be just as great no matter where this advice and this encouragement and this sharing comes from. But I have to say, I believe there's something, because men have so many, in their mind, they have so many things keeping them from sharing, and ways that they still believe, no matter, what's still going on in the world, that they need to behave and how they should act. And I often think that to hear it from another guy, to hear it from a guy friend to say to a guy, why don't you go see a therapist? It will be really helpful. I did that. I think that is one of the most freeing, amazing things. And I hope that it works if a woman tells them to, or their partner tells them to.
Sure.
There's something, look, I just think there's something great about that makes them think like, oh, I would love that, but I felt funny. And now my guy friend is telling me this, or he struggled and this is how he got better. I feel, for so long, I've done a lot of things with sexual harassment and sexual assault, and how many men really would never, ever, ever do such a thing, but they don't speak up. When they see it, they're embarrassed, they're horrified by it, but they are scared to, speak up at a frat party where somebody is, where there's maybe one bad apple and the rest of them would never do it. And so this to me is almost like a version of that, where men need to feel comfortable to speak up and to, like you say, have that power of vulnerability, because that's one of the most freeing things that there are. And that's an amazing thing. So I just think it's so fabulous that you did this. And reading your book, the way I think that so many men and women will relate to your voice and how you wrote it. It's so interesting. There's just nothing dry about it. It's interesting. You kind of get it. I can visualize what you're going through and feel for you, but I also visualize the other people in the book, and it's just relatable. And honestly, I think it's a service to many other people, but especially men.
I agree.
Maybe I'm being, funny that way. I just think women are not always. There's women that hold it inside, and it doesn't.
We have an easier time asking for help. At least certainly
confiding in our friends.
Oh my God! Listen,
confiding in our friends.
There is a gap in emotional intelligence, and I know we can walk on a tightrope here, but women are much better at this than we are. Much better.
If it's intelligent. It just talking.
I think I think it really does matter, of course, who you have around you. And listen, not everyone is going to have the support system that I had. My God, I had my entire family behind me. I had my coworker. I had a lot of coworkers who were friends who were aware of it. I had my reserve commander, the head of my reserve unit, who was intervening on my behalf and helping me take steps to, kind of transition out of all of that work, because that was obviously a rather stressful environment as well. So I had a lot of people behind me, and the sad truth is a lot of people don't have what I had. They don't have that support. They don't. So, for me, I think when you go through an experience like this, you can go through it, you can recover, you can put it on a shelf, and it just becomes like a little tile on the mosaic of your life, and it blends in with everything else, and you move ahead. And quite honestly, there's nothing wrong with that. If you can get through something like this, or worse, and you can move on with your life and be happy and productive and live a great life, then I'm all for it. I think that's great. Not everybody needs to write a book. Not everybody needs to speak openly about it. This is not easy. I mean, it's not easy for me to do it, and I'm not saying that to be self-aggrandizing. But for me, as embarrassing as a lot of this detail is, for me, if I can just take away the shame, I'll take the embarrassment. I don't care. I mean, I'm 46. I'm well into my career at this point. I don't. To me, I don't have a lot to necessarily. I mean, I still have things I want to do. Still things I want to accomplish. I talk about dreams. I talk about mission and purpose. I mean, that's a huge chunk of the book. So talk about all that. But I don't worry so much anymore about what other people think. And if people can read this and pass it on to somebody who needs it, or it inspires them to intervene, because I don't believe in the maxim that, well, that's somebody's personal business, and we don't want to get involved and we don't want to poke our nose in. I'll tell you something, like I appreciate the sentiment behind that, and I appreciate people's right to privacy, and believe me, I'm all about boundaries. Really, I am.
Mhm.
But if somebody's in crisis, you do what you need to do, because as I talk about this with my brother, you'd rather step on some fingers and toes than put a rose on somebody's casket.
That is very powerful. Well, Jim, thank you for spending time with us today. I think you've illuminated a subject that we need to continually talk about and get ahead of. And I hope and I believe your book is actually going to save lives. That if you give especially, and it's not just men, women too, but again, taking that shame out of this process, you also show people a path to wellness. It's not just, again, we say it's this black box. I'm a professional. We do have some tools and there are ways to get through this. And again, finding resources, looking for help, saying, look, I'm in this place. I need the support. And just taking that first small step is life-saving and important and profound. So thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thank you both.
How does everybody find your book?
Oh, you can, yeah, absolutely. You can go to Amazon.com and type in "Conversation with a Desperate Man." You can go to Barnes and Noble, or I think it's on a bunch of different
brand
platforms.
New one right down the street here in Westport.
Yeah, I know, and go there and ask them for it, because the manager's telling me, well, we got to get a certain critical mass of people asking. And so I say, yeah, okay, go to the store and ask them about it. But no, that they can find it in all those places.
Awesome. Well, I have a good friend at the Pequot Library in Southport, and it would be really cool for you to do a whole talk on this, because I think this issue is important and relevant, and that community probably love to hear from it too. So.
And I would love to do that, and I look forward to the day when we can all come out in the sunshine again, because this is yeah, absolutely. I've got my vaccine appointment, I think. So I'm
done. Yes.
Yeah,
good for you.
They're going to start to not a trickle. They're going to start to flood in soon, I think. So.
Oh yeah, you'll get that. You'll get vaccine like you can get hand sanitizer now. You can walk out and get a Milky Way at the counter and maybe get some vaccine. I don't know. It'll get out there.
As they say. So yes, and then hopefully maybe we'll get to hear your talk in person, or at least outside somewhere soon. So
absolutely.
We want to check back in with you and see how it's going, and see if these institutions are actually, walking the talk and making change. So
we're gonna rattle some cages. So we'll let you know.
Come on with one of them. That would be great. With somebody.
Yeah, absolutely.
Someone from the wellness.
That's a very good idea. It's a very good idea.
Okay. Well, a pleasure. Really a pleasure, and a really great book.
Thank you.
Thanks. To be continued. All the best.